Developing childhood fears is a pretty common experience. A common example is when a kid touches a hot stove. Before this fear is hardwired into the poor kid's brain, the stove is this cool looking thing. It creates really cool smells. All the adults are always around this strange but cool thing. So the kid decides to run up and touch this and gets burned. In a split second, a fear is created. Most non-instinctive fears are created really quickly. If you've ever been in a car crash, then you probably remember this as if it happened in slow motion. Psychologists have always been interested in this because this is such a common experience. So the question is, do we really experience this in slow motion and that's how we remember this? Or is our slow motion memory constructed after the fact, perhaps due to the trauma? There was a pretty cool study done to see if this is accurate. The theory was that when something sudden and dangerous happens, our brain shifts into pure uptime when our senses are on high alert. Most of the time, our senses are running more or less on autopilot. Most of this stuff just bypasses our conscious brain and goes directly into your unconscious. But when dangerous fight or flight type events suddenly pop up out of nowhere, your brain suddenly shifts into high alert when you can see everything, when you can remember everything. And because there is so much data being put into your conscious brain, you will later remember this as if it happened in slow motion. They set up a test to see if this really is true. They had a test group and a control group. Both groups had these tablets that would show information for a certain amount of time. Both groups would have the same information. Both groups would then try to remember this information. The control group was in a regular classroom setting, comfortable, safe, boring. The test group tried to remember this while bungee jumping, a safe environment, but one that would hopefully stimulate the fight or flight 100% uptime brain response. And as expected, the test group was able to remember this at a much higher rate than the control group. It turns out that the CIA has known about this for a long time. This is one of those things they discovered way back when they were doing the MK Ultra program. And this technique of being able to develop photographic memory was very successful. They had to use a two-step process. They wanted their agents to remember much more than they would during the few seconds an organic fight or flight situation would unfold. So they used a combination of drugs and brainwave entrainment techniques to create a sustained fight or flight brainwave state. And during that state, the agents could develop a near perfect photographic memory. The more they kept the agents in this state, the more they could easily remember everything. They could recall all the information being pumped into their brains during this heightened artificial fight or flight neurological state. But the problem was that the longer they kept them in this state, the more they would develop psychosis. And having a trained assassin that is also becoming a psychopath is a very, very dangerous thing. This is where the second phase came in. The second phase was a very carefully calibrated post-hypnotic amnesia. So they were able to keep the data but forget the fear. So long as the ratio was about 5-1, they would be able to remember the information but forget all the fear. So they would keep them in an artificial fight or flight state for 5 days, 18 hours a day, and then give them 1 day of pure hypnotic amnesia. They would be able to create photographic memories, but then they would experience amnesia to forget negative memories. This allowed for a near perfect process to develop photographic memories. The result of the bungee jumping experiment was kind of what they expected. This is one of those things that makes perfect sense from both a theoretical standpoint and an experimental one. So if you need to study for an exam and you want to remember everything, consider taking your textbook skydiving with you, or maybe take your textbook to the zoo and jump into the gorilla cage. You might consider hooking yourself up to one of those big cranes and having one of your friends lower you into the gorilla cage with your textbook, and you can study while the gorilla charges at you and then pull you out at the last minute. Or if you happen to have one of those bungee jumping amusement parks nearby, you might try this to remember everything that you study. And because of your intense fear, you'll remember everything. Because our brains are set up to encode memories at a specific bit rate, when you cram in a bunch more data than normal because of the 100% uptime, the brain has to compensate by slowing down the flow of time, a kind of way to hallucinate the memory so that you can artificially maintain the same memory bit rate. Otherwise, you might go insane. Luckily, the stove fear is easy to overwrite. That's the thing about fears. They are programmed in very quickly due to our ancient fight or flight mechanism. But if you take the same thing that caused the fear and slowly use that to create opposite feelings like happiness, that will slowly overwrite the fear. And as you slowly move through time, you'll use that same stove to create positive memories. The more you create positive memories, the more you'll erase your old fears. And pretty soon you'll be able to remember the information and forget all your fears. Kind of like an evolutionarily engineered method to continue to fill your brain with useful information.